Headway Advanced by John and Liz Soars. Cassette 1, Side 1. Unit 1, Tape Script 1A. Interview with Mr. Ian Beer, Headmaster of Harrow School.
Let me ask you first, Harrow School and schools like it are known as independent schools, and until recently they were referred to as public schools. Why is it that a private school was known as a public school?
You must remember that the vast majority of the independent schools were founded well before any government in this country made state education available to all. Therefore, before 1900, all these independent schools were available to the total public. Admittedly, they had to pay fees, and that is where the name public came from. Once the government began to legislate to give all children in the land a state education, then the public schools, which were indeed private, changed their name to being independent. In other words, independent of government control.
Has Harrow School changed in the past 100 years?
I think that if a foreigner came to Harrow Hill and looked at the boys in the High Street and the masters, they would think it hadn't. The boys wear straw hats, they wear the old, what is called a bluer, a blazer kind of garment during the week. They wear tails on a Sunday, the senior boys wear top hats. All the masters have to teach in suits and wear gowns. I have to wear my mortarboard to raise my hat to the boys as they raise their hat to me. And there is a traditional formality along the high street. Once you dive into the classroom or into a boarding house or into my study, you would find that the place had changed at a deeper level, very, very much indeed. The curriculum, of course, has changed fundamentally. Science was not taught here in the last century. Fox Talbot, who started photography in this country, started his experiments in this very house, but was banned by the headmaster as he did not want chemistry to be taught. So today you will find Latin and Greek is taught as it was in 1570, but you will also find craft design technology, Russian, computer sciences, and a lot of very modern teaching techniques in all subjects.
You have 770 boys here between the ages of 13 and 18. What about discipline? How do you control them?
Well, we're rather a village on the hill. There are 770 boys. There are over 200 people employed here who live on the hill with their families. And we try and run it as a little village. We do not, as a lot of other people I know think, we do not beat any boys here. We try and encourage them to treat other people as they would be treated. We're very fussy about courtesy and the normal kinds of ill discipline which you would find in any family of young boys growing up and spreading their wings are usually things which are antisocial. And so we try and punish them by making them do something back for the community. If you had been here this morning, you would have found a senior boy with a group of naughty boys. At 6:45 in the morning, they would be clearing up all the litter over the main public streets of Harrow Hill in order to keep our environment clean and tidy.
As this is a boarding school, let's talk a bit about the extracurricular activities. What do you do with the children when they're not in class?
We here feel strongly that we educate the whole man, and therefore, because they're here 24 hours of the day, it gives us the opportunity of carrying out our academic teaching in the form room, and then in the afternoons and evenings we devote our time to such activities as teaching acting, music, art, technology, all the kind of games you could possibly think of, society life, debating societies, science societies, philosophy societies, chapel services, communion services. In other words, we try here, I come back to the word I used earlier, we are really a village and we have total village life.
Tape script 1B. Radio programme on independent schools.
Hello, and welcome to today's Worldly Wise, the programme that investigates current issues and tells you, the consumer, all about them. Today, our attention turns to independent schools, the alternative system for those that can afford it. Most people believe that independent schools offer their pupils advantages that state schools don't. Some think this is unfair. Others will go to the edge of ruin to get the best education for their children. What are the independent schools like these days? Are they still as they were depicted in so many books and films? We sent Patricia Wilby to investigate.
In 1980, Eton abolished fagging. That is, younger boys acting as servants to older, more senior ones, after the head had at last persuaded 2/3 of his housemasters that this was an outdated institution. Winchester, for the first time in its history, sent more boys to provincial universities than it sent to Oxbridge. Bradford Grammar School decided that boys of 13 and 14 should be compelled to study science. And the headmaster of Oundle was able to assert that although the practice had not been formally abolished, boys had not been beaten for many years. Public schools are not what they were. For a start, you're not supposed to call them public schools anymore. They prefer the term independent school, suggesting initiative and enterprise instead of snobbery and prejudice. Over the past 15 years, they've set out to bury the image of institutions that was socially divisive, obsessed with the classics, disdainful of industry because it meant money was earned, not inherited, and where success on the sports field was more important than success in the exam room. The modern public school will point out that engineering is the largest single destination for its leavers. It will show you computer terminals, science laboratories, and craft workshops. It will introduce you, if at all possible, to pupils whose backgrounds are far from aristocratic. Yet what is remarkable about this revolution is not so much that it has happened, but that it has happened so recently. And if much has changed, what critics regard as the most important things have not. The majority of the nation's cabinet ministers, top civil servants, ambassadors, high court judges, military leaders, bishops and bank directors went to public schools. They still account for about half the entrants to Oxford and Cambridge. Although most Western countries have independent school sectors, the British public school system is unique in the extent to which it is set apart from the rest of the nation. This isolation is possible because by comparison the private sector in Britain is remarkably small. Around 5% of the nation's schoolchildren go private, while in the United States the figure is 10% and in France 30%. But the most significant change of all is the importance that is now attached to academic achievement. In the top schools, the focus is firmly on A-levels. GCSEs are regarded as a distraction, and pupils might take 1 or 2 when they are 15. It is academic success that is going to keep top people where they think they belong, at the top.
And that was a special report by Patricia Wilby. Next week, we'll be looking at the state of state education. Until then, goodbye.
Unit 2, Tape Script 2. Interview with Graham Greene.
The main problem about interviewing Graham Greene is that there's so much one could ask him about. So many things he's done, places he's visited during his 78 years, as well as writing more than 20 of this century's most ingenious, inventive and exciting novels. In appearance, he's tall and slim, with that slightly apologetic stoop that tall people sometimes have. A modest, affable man who seemed at first a little nervous of my tape recorder. Every novelist, he once wrote, has something in common with a spy. He watches, he overhears, he seeks motives and analyzes character. And as he does so, there's a splinter of ice in his heart. That's an essential quality, according to Graham Greene.
You've got to be cold and you mustn't get emotionally involved with your characters.
So you have to preserve a distance from your characters?
You've got to preserve a distance. I mean, they're going to come out of your guts, as it were, but you've got to cut the umbilical cord very quickly.
What about the kind of ice in the heart that you need when you're listening to other people's conversations or observing the way they react?
Yes, actually I used that phrase about when I was young and I was in hospital for appendicitis, and there was a small boy who had broken his leg at football and he died in front of one's eyes. And then the parents arrived. They'd been summoned to the hospital and arrived too late, and the mother broke down and wept by the bed and used the kind of banal phrases that a bad writer would use in a book. And I mean, the fact that all the other people in the ward put on earphones over their ears, and I'm afraid I didn't. I listened.
You listened because you felt it was something you could use?
Because it was something I could use.
Do you observe yourself closely too, your own emotions? Are those important for a writer to use?
I probably do without knowing it, because I went through psychoanalysis when I was 16, and that probably gave me a habit of observing.
How much do you use your own experience then? I mean, places you've been to, people you've met in your writing?
Not people much. I mean, except perhaps a very tiny minor character or somebody who passes across the stage, as it were, without any speech. But the main character has to be imagined, and therefore some of one must be in him. But he's a kind of composite figure, like we are composite figures of our fathers and grandfathers and great-grandfathers.
Graham Greene's flat at Antibes in the south of France contains several abandoned, unfinished novels. Greene says that as he writes a novel, the narrative is outside his conscious control. He hands over that control to the story and the characters. And he never knows, therefore, until he's at least a quarter of the way into a book, whether it will actually grow into a complete novel or not.
As a rule, one knows the beginning and the middle and the end. The great thing is to let the characters dictate a certain extent. They probably won't dictate any change in the end, because in the end is one's beginning, as it were. But it's a very pleasant sensation when one gets up from a day's working. Well, I never thought of that.
Ways of Escape is the title of your second autobiographical book. You say that a large part of your life, writing and travelling, is escape. Escape from what?
Boredom.
Is that boredom with the world or with yourself?
With both, probably.
I find it hard to understand, in a way, how someone who has a great curiosity about people and who also has the means and the opportunity to travel can nevertheless be bored.
Well, I think one is born with a capacity for boredom. I've experienced it first terribly at the age of 16. And even danger doesn't destroy boredom. For instance, during a blitz, one could be afraid for about an hour or so, but then one became bored. It became increasingly boring. And once, and I think it comes in Ways of Escape, when I was caught in the crossfire on the Suez Canal. One was afraid for a while. One was for about 2 hours or more on a sandbank, and then one got more and more bored. So I think it is a disease, really.
But you have sought danger as a way of relieving boredom.
Yes, but then unfortunately the danger becomes boring.
Unit 2, Tape Script 3. Extract from a spy story.
Angus Pym woke up on the dot of 6 o'clock, as he always did, no matter where he was or what he had been doing the previous day. His first thought was the realization that he was still wearing shirt and trousers, and when his eyes fell on the reports piled up around him on the bed, the events of the previous evening came back to him. He had gone to his club for supper, had just finished his steak tartare and was looking forward to a splendid zabaglione, when his meal was rudely interrupted by a call from M, his controller. After an ice-cold shower, Pym thought carefully about which suit to put on. He was seeing M at 9 o'clock that morning, and he wanted to make a good impression. Glancing at himself in the mirror, he noticed that he'd put on weight recently. He would have to pay more attention to his diet in the future. An hour later, as he was driving through the rush-hour traffic on his way to meet M, Pym carefully considered the contents of the files. So Zircon, the organization which sought to control the free Western world, was back in business. Its founder, Leon Biarovitz, was dead, Pym knew this because he'd personally arranged his death. But who controlled Zircon now? Doubtless M would tell him.
Unit 3, Tape Script 4. Mad Dogs and Englishmen by Noel Coward. Tape Script 5. Interview with Quentin Crisp. This is part of an interview with Quentin Crisp, which was broadcast on LBC, London Broadcasting Company, radio. The interviewer asked Quentin Crisp why he had always felt different and apart from other people.
I really never had any option to do anything else. I was never going to be able to join the human race, and I realized that very early. When I was a child, I was an object of scorn. I don't ever remember not being laughed at by my brothers and my sister and my parents when I was a child, by the other boys at school, as you can well imagine, when I went to school, and by the people with whom I worked when I went out into the world. So that it seemed I either had to try and make a go of being myself or accept complete failure as being a real person.
It sounds as though it was a very miserable childhood, wasn't it?
It was a miserable childhood, but one must be careful. I wasn't beaten. I wasn't shut in dark cellars for days on end. You hear now such terrible things happening to children that you have to be careful when you say, I had a rotten childhood. It was, in a sense, my own fault. I was unable to learn how to be with other people in the sense of being like other people.
When did that first hit you? When did you first realise that that's how you felt?
Well, I suppose mostly at school, when my appearance, which was just like, to me, I was just like everybody else. I mean, they wouldn't have allowed me to grow my hair long, because, as you know, public school is just like being in prison. But it still made no difference. People were saying, why on earth do you say these things? Why do you stand like that? Why do you look like that? I mean, it never stopped.
Do you think this was with you from birth? I mean, if the rest of your family was so completely conventional and ordinary, how did you learn to be like that?
I don't know how it happened, because, yes, my mother and father were middle-class, middle-brow, middling people, and my sister was just like a human being all her life. My brothers were sort of part-time hooligans. When one of my nieces went all the way to Chile to see her cousin and see my brother, when she came back, she said, oh, he's a hooligan. And I said, he can't be. He's been the same firm for 30 years. And she said, well, he went to a board meeting wearing rope-soled sandals and one of his daughter's jumpers.
But, I mean, have you kept in touch with your family? Did you feel that you were rejected by your family, or did you reject your family?
They were very good. My father died when I was 22, more or less in self-defense, I think. My mother lived till I was in my 50s. And, of course, if you live long enough, you become the same age as your parents. If you're 3 and your mother is 30, she might be from another planet. If you're 53 and your mother is 83, what the hell? You're just two little old people. So I got to know my mother, and indeed I knew her better than I knew my sister, in a sense.
The interview goes on to discuss Quentin Crisp's career as a writer, which, although successful, did not bring in much money.
Would you have liked more money, though? I mean, what would you have done with it if you'd had it?
If I'd had a great deal of money, I wouldn't have lived very differently. I would have lived in one room. I never know what people do with the room they're not in. I would have lived in a larger room, and it would have been made so that everything was very easy for me to do. I like the process of living to be reduced to an absolute minimum. But otherwise than that, I would have lived in America earlier. I could have gone there, and I should say if I was rich, I would have been welcome come what may. Otherwise than that, I would have lived in one room. I would have done whatever people found for me to do. And when I wasn't doing it, I would have done a hell of a lot of nothing. I'm very good at doing nothing.
One of the stories about you is that you lived in this room in Chelsea for 37 years without ever cleaning it. Is that true?
That's true. There's no need to clean your room. All that's a dream invented by your mother. Everyone who sees you in your room says you can't go on living like this. You'll get some terrible disease, and so on. It's all quite untrue. I'm still here, nearly 80, and I've never cleaned any room I've lived in.
Unit 4, Tape Script 6. 6 people's childhood memories. 1.
I used to like to do well just to see the look of pleasure on my dad's face. He'd say, "Pet, it's like a tonic to me when you do well. I don't know how I have such clever children." But I never felt I was being pushed too hard. If I did badly, he'd just say, "Well, what'll it matter 100 years from now that you failed your geography exam?"
2.
Whatever I did was just never quite good enough. I wasn't very strong as a child. I used to get attacks of asthma, so I couldn't do PE or games. Well, anyway, when I was 12, I was so thrilled because I was put in the second 11 for cricket. I was so sure he'd be pleased. Do you know what he said? Second team? When I was your age, I was in the first for cricket, rugby and hockey. I felt so crushed. I just crawled away and cried. In private, of course.
3.
Our house was always open to whoever came round. You'd never know how many people would sit down to a meal. My parents were always inviting people in, and my sisters and I brought friends from school. They used to love coming to our house because they were made so welcome. There were no petty rules, and as long as we tidied up, they didn't mind what we did. We called a lot of my parents' friends uncle or aunt so-and-so. We never used to know who were our real relations, but what was so nice for us kids was that we grew up surrounded by a lot of adults, not just our parents, so we heard what they had to say, and they listened to our opinions as well.
4.
I think it started out of sheer boredom. I mean, they gave me every material benefit, pocket money any time I asked. I had my own brand new BMW when I was 17. I wanted for nothing except their time. I mean, they were always so busy, always getting dressed up to go somewhere, and so wrapped up in each other. I really don't know why they had children. They always said I was a mistake. Anyway, I started hanging about with this bunch of yobbos, and they said, "Try it." And I thought, why not? Who cares?
5.
They finally split up when I was 4. It's one of my earliest memories. My dad sitting me on his knee and saying, "Mummy and Daddy have decided to live in different houses, and I want you to decide which house you want to live in." Can you imagine asking a child of 4? I hadn't a clue what to say, but my very much bigger brother was standing behind him, mouthing, "Say Mum, say Mum." So I did, and I never saw my dad again, except once when I was about 10, from the top of a double-decker bus. At least, I think it was him. I'm sure it was that time, only I still keep thinking I see him all over the place. Oh, I've had 3 stepdads. It's not the same.
6.
She was like a sea of calm. Nothing ruffled her. She always had time. Me and the others would be scrapping about something and she'd say, okay, let's calm down. Let's go back to the beginning and sort it out. So we did, and it was sorted out. I remember this school friend of mine. She fell off her bike and completely smashed her front teeth. She didn't cry because she was hurt, but because her mother was so particular about her appearance. She said, "She'll kill me. She thinks I have such lovely teeth." I thought, gosh, how weird. Couldn't bear it if my mother was like that. In fact, this friend came to my mum first, and she rang and told her mum what had happened. Fancy not being able to go to your own mum.
Tape Script 7. Extract from a talk by Dr. Spock, the paediatrician.
I think in previous centuries and still in the first half of the 20th centuries, parents felt they had to intimidate their children, just the way I was intimidated, scolded all the time, made to feel evil, threatened with loss of love and maybe some kind of punishment. I used to be scared of my parents. I was scared of the policeman on the block. I was scared of my teachers. I was scared of barking dogs. I was scared of bullies. Now, I think that it was Freud and Dewey particularly who changed that point of view. Freud said in so many words, it isn't by disciplining or intimidating your children, it's by loving them, then they love you and they want to be worthy of you and they want to grow up to be mature people like you. In other words, it's the love between parent and child that makes them mature and become responsible. And I think it was Dewey who said, you don't have to force children to learn, they're wild to learn. I think both of these philosophers gave parents more trust in their children. I think my job was to translate this into ordinary language and apply it to ordinary home situations. And that what the book really says is not only trust yourself as a parent, it says trust your children. They will want to grow up responsible. So I think many fewer parents tried to intimidate their children in the last 25 years, and I think that's why their children are that independent. So that when the government says, don't reason about the war, go off and fight it because we tell you to, young people say, wait a minute, maybe you're not right. Maybe it isn't the right war. And I think that when universities say to youths, never mind your ideas about how you should be taught, we're in this business, you take it from us. And I think young people said, well, maybe it is our business. We're the ones who are here for the education. So I think that I had a small part in translating Freud and Dewey.
End of side 1.